Buried deep within the shadows of medieval history lies a tale so scandalous it was whispered in fear, condemned as blasphemy, and ruthlessly erased from the Church's records. A legend of ambition, deception, and an unthinkable secret that shook the very heart of Christendom. They called her Johannes Anglicus. But behind the robes, the titles, and the throne of St. Peter was a woman. A woman who, if the stories are true, became Pope. And it all unravelled in the most shocking way imaginable. Was it myth? Was it a heretical invention? Or a truth too dangerous for history to remember? Tonight, we unravel the forbidden legend of Pope Joan, the papal impostor who defied a world built for men, and paid the ultimate price. In the shadowed corridors of medieval Europe, where superstition often eclipsed reason, certain stories took root, whispered by candlelight in stone cloisters, embroidered into tapestries, and passed from traveller to traveller along treacherous roads. Tales of miracles and monsters, of fallen kings and heretic saints. And amidst these, one story lingered longer than most. A legend so scandalous, so utterly unthinkable, that it struck at the very heart of Christendom itself. The story of a woman who, disguised as a man, rose through the highest ranks of the Church to become Pope. Was it fact, a fable, or a weapon wielded by political enemies? For centuries no one could say. But the name Pope Joan, or Johann Anglicus, as she was said to have called herself, became a symbol of forbidden ambition and the terrifying consequences of a secret too bold to keep. Our tale begins, not in Rome or Jerusalem, but in a modest town along the banks of the Rhine, Ingelheim, Germany. It was said that Joan was born here around the year 822, though, as with much of this legend, no official record survives to confirm it. What does survive are the centuries-old rumours that from her earliest years, Joan was no ordinary child. She possessed what was called in hushed voices a dangerous hunger, a voracious, unladylike desire for knowledge. In a world where a woman's duties were confined to hearth and cradle, Joan devoured Latin manuscripts, theological debates, and the secrets of medicine. It was a time when the Church dictated the very nature of reality, when comets foretold doom and eclipses signalled divine wrath. Education was a rare and sacred thing, hoarded by monasteries and cathedral schools, and denied to all but the most privileged of men. A woman who sought learning, a woman who debated scripture, a woman who dreamed of Athens and Rome. Such a creature, in the eyes of the medieval world, could only be a witch, or worse. And yet, according to the earliest account, penned not in her lifetime, but centuries later by the Dominican friar Jean de Mailly in 1255, Joan would not be deterred. To claim the education she craved, Joan is said to have made a dangerous, irreversible choice. She would abandon her name, her family, and her very identity. She would become John Anglicus, an Englishman, though born in Germany, and would walk the perilous road forbidden to women. Together with a lover, whose name history did not preserve, Joan travelled to the ancient city of Athens, a city whose faded libraries and crumbling statues still clung to memories of classical wisdom, long since eclipsed by the shadow of the Church. There, it is said, she studied philosophy, medicine, and theology. She debated with scholars and walked the marble halls disguised as a man. And it was here, too, that she first learned the art of survival, the constant performance, the careful calculation of words, the masking of every trace of femininity. But it was not enough. For even the ancient wisdom of Athens could not match the power of Rome, the seat of the Papacy, the heart of Christian Europe, the place where kings begged forgiveness and empires rose and fell at the whim of the Holy See. And so, driven by a mixture of audacity and desperation, Joan made her way to the Eternal City. Rome in the 9th century was no shining metropolis. It was a city of intrigue, violence, and holy relics. A city where daggers were concealed beneath monks' robes, and where salvation could be bought or stolen. It was here, according to legend, that Johannes Anglicus rose through the ranks of the Church, a man of unmatched intellect, kindness, and insight, a priest who soothed the suffering and outwitted rivals, a confidant to cardinals, and a scholar whose wisdom was said to rival even the fathers of the Church. No one suspected the truth. For in a world blinded by certainty, it never occurred to them to question whether the most brilliant cleric in Rome might not be a man at all. And so it was, or so the story goes, that a woman, veiled in priestly robes, came to walk the marble halls of the Vatican. A secret destined to unravel in the most catastrophic of ways. The legend of Pope Joan was not born in her lifetime, if she lived at all, but centuries later. Yet, in every version of the tale, the seeds of rebellion, danger, and desire are the same. A woman against a world that denied her. A deception so perfect it shook the very foundations of the Church. A scandal so grave it was said to be buried, forgotten. And yet, it refused to die. In the shadowed alleys and towering basilicas of medieval Rome, ambition was a treacherous thing. It could raise a man to sainthood, or drag him to an unmarked grave in the Tiber. But for one remarkable figure, ambition was not merely survival. It was destiny cloaked in secrecy. The legend claims that Johannes Anglicus, as she was known to the world, ascended swiftly through the ranks of the Roman Church. At a time when theology was entwined with politics, when papal robes concealed daggers as readily as crosses, intellect was the most dangerous weapon a cleric could possess, and Joan wielded it with surgical precision. She served under Pope Leo IV, a period marked by political intrigue, foreign invasions, and bitter rivalries between the great Roman families. The papacy was no gentle post. It was a throne contested as fiercely as any crown in Europe. Yet amid this storm, Johannes Anglicus thrived. Her reputation as a theologian was second to none. It was said she could unravel the densest scriptures, silence her opponents in public debate, and compose letters to distant monarchs that dripped with both wisdom and subtle command. But it wasn't mere scholarship that set her apart. It was her uncanny ability to navigate the deadly undercurrents of papal politics. She resolved bitter disputes between rival factions of clergy, easing centuries-old feuds with a few carefully chosen words. She quelled rebellious whispers among the nobility. Even foreign envoys sought the counsel of the learned cleric, whose grasp of theology, diplomacy, and human nature was said to be unmatched. The sick claimed her prayers hastened their recovery. The desperate swore that one glance from her steady, pale eyes could ease a troubled soul. And though she held no official rank at first, within the Vatican's labyrinthine corridors, her voice carried weight far beyond her station. In a city where secrets were traded like coin, no one, not a single rival, spy, or ally, suspected that the brilliant cleric with ink-stained fingers and a calm, unwavering gaze was in fact a woman. And then, as legend tells, came the turning point. In the year 855, Pope Leo IV died suddenly, leaving a power vacuum in his wake. The eternal city, always restless, teetered on the brink of chaos. Rival noble families schemed for control of the papal seat, their hired swords prowling the streets, while factions within the College of Cardinals bickered bitterly behind closed doors. It was then, amid the turmoil, that the impossible happened. The College of Cardinals, weary of bloodshed and desperate for a unifying figure, cast their votes. And in what the chroniclers would later call a miraculous display of unanimity, they elected Johannes Anglicus as Pope, bestowing upon Joan the name John VIII. To the citizens of Rome, it seemed as though Providence itself had intervened. A pope of unmatched wisdom, a scholar saint untouched by scandal or faction. A man, they believed, chosen by heaven to guide Christendom through its darkest hours. But beneath the awe and celebration lurked the seeds of catastrophe. For Joan, it was a victory that was both astonishing and perilous. She had reached the highest office in Christendom, the Bishop of Rome, successor to Saint Peter, Vicar of Christ on earth. The robe and ring were hers, and with them, unimaginable power. Yet every day, every ceremony, every whispered counsel brought with it the growing threat of discovery. The heavy papal vestments could disguise her form, but not forever. The tight courtyards of the Lateran Palace were filled with watchful eyes. Rivals circled like wolves, hungry for weakness. Still, according to the legend, Pope Joan proved herself worthy of the throne. She ruled not as a figurehead, but as a true pontiff. She reformed corrupt orders, brokered peace between feuding barons, and held Rome's unruly streets in check. In the Vatican's private libraries, it was said she uncovered ancient texts lost to centuries of neglect. She commissioned new monasteries and sent envoys to far-flung kingdoms. For 2 years, Rome knew rare peace under her hand. But fate is a patient, ruthless mistress. In the darkened corridors of power, it is said that old suspicions began to stir. The Pope's refusal to take mistresses, a curiosity in itself in an age where papal chastity was a polite fiction, began to raise quiet questions. His reluctance to bathe publicly, his absence from the boisterous hunts and feasts beloved by his predecessors, all minor peculiarities that, when pieced together, hinted at a forbidden truth. And as the ancient chroniclers whisper, it was not long before Pope Joan herself realised that the walls of secrecy were closing in. Yet still she remained, caught between the impossible, a woman upon St. Peter's throne, and the inevitable. The legend says she knew the moment would come. That in dreams, angels warned her. That on the eve of her final procession, she penned a letter to her most trusted confessor, entrusting to him a single line. "It is not fear, but the truth, that shall undo me." And so she rode out into the streets of Rome, beneath fluttering banners and the tolling of 100 bells, the first and only woman to claim the papal tiara. A miracle, a scandal, and a tragedy yet to unfold. For 2 years, 7 months, and 4 days, so the legend claims, Pope Joan, veiled beneath the name John VIII, ruled from the heart of Christendom. Her reign, it is said, shimmered with wisdom, mercy, and an uncanny gift for peacemaking in an era rife with corruption, intrigue, and bloodshed. She was a healer in times of plague, an arbitrator among warring factions, and a scholar whose sermons could quiet the most restless of souls. But in Rome, nothing remains hidden forever. The higher one ascends in power, the more precarious the perch. The more luminous the crown, the darker the shadow it casts. And for Joan, the reckoning would come not in some dimly lit chamber or whispered confession, but in the full, unrelenting glare of Rome's streets. On a day of great celebration, Some say an Easter procession, others a Corpus Christi parade. The Holy Father led a grand retinue through the cobbled avenues of the Eternal City. Crimson banners hung from the marble balconies. The scent of myrrh mingled with the sharp tang of sweat and dust. Pilgrims knelt in fervent prayer as the papal cortege passed, believing themselves in the presence of God's earthly vessel. And then, in an instant, the impossible unravelled. Pope Joan faltered. A pale hand clutched the pommel of her saddle. Her face, once serene beneath the weight of the papal tiara, contorted in agony. The hush that fell over the crowd was unnatural, a vacuum in which time itself seemed to hesitate. And there, amid clergy, nobles, soldiers, and peasants, she collapsed. The legend speaks of horror-stricken cardinals, of citizens frozen in place, of a single terrible moment when the hem of her papal robe was lifted, and the child, bloodied and squalling, slipped into the dust of the Via Sacra. A woman, a mother, a pope. This enormous temporal chasm is the legend's fatal flaw. For if a woman had truly ascended the throne of St. Peter, if a child had been born in the streets of Rome during a papal procession, if the College of Cardinals had been deceived so utterly, it would have sent shockwaves through medieval Christendom. Such an incident would have been seized upon by chroniclers, scandalized bishops, opportunistic rulers, and Rome's many rivals. Yet silence reigns. No contemporary chronicler, no cleric, no diplomat so much as hints at the event. And therein lies the paradox. Because while the official history remains stubbornly mute, the legend of Pope Joan refused to die. Some defenders of the tale cling to the old historian's maxim: absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Could it be, they ask, that the Church, whose history is replete with episodes of suppression, censorship, and ruthless control of narrative, succeeded in expunging every trace of this singular scandal? Could an entire episode of history have been scrubbed from the record with medieval efficiency? It seems implausible, and yet not entirely impossible. The medieval Church wielded enormous power over parchment, over stone, over the minds and tongues of the people. Tales of forbidden gospels, purged heresies, and obliterated sects populate ecclesiastical history. Could the story of a woman pope have been one such casualty? The defenders of Joan's legend point to curious relics and traditions as shadowy proof. There is the infamous sedia stercoraria, the marble chair with a curious opening beneath the seat, still on display in the Vatican museums. Some medieval commentators suggested this peculiar furnishing was once used to discreetly verify the masculinity of newly elected popes, a practice allegedly instituted in the wake of Joan's disastrous reign. Though modern scholars believe the chair's original purpose was likely ceremonial or symbolic, the association clings to it like ivy to ancient stone. They point too to the street known in medieval Rome as Vicus Papissa, the street of the Popes, where the supposed incident occurred. Though later renamed, references to the location endure in various texts and maps. And then, of course, there is the persistent echo of the tale itself, surviving in chronicles, plays, sermons, woodcuts, and folklore long after its official denouncement. For centuries, Protestant polemicists in the Reformation era seized upon Pope Joan's legend as evidence of the Catholic Church's moral corruption and institutional hypocrisy. Some went so far as to claim that her scandal disrupted the unbroken line of apostolic succession from St. Peter himself, rendering all subsequent popes illegitimate. Faced with this theological nightmare, the Church responded forcefully. The legend was condemned as heresy. Catholic historians from the 16th century onward denounced the tale as a fabrication born of ignorance, malice, or mischief. Baronius, the learned Vatican librarian, made it his mission to scour and refute the tale from history. And yet, like a stubborn ghost, the legend lingered. Today, it survives not in dusty annals or doctrinal treatises, but in novels, operas, films, and even video games. Joan, whether myth or martyr, has transcended the ecclesiastical history from which she sprang. She has become a symbol of forbidden ambition, of the perils of secrecy, and of the eternal fascination humankind holds for those rare moments when the forbidden threatens to breach the sacred. Historians may declare the case closed, the records may bear no witness. But in the shadowy corners of history, and in the hearts of those who believe in the power of a good story, Pope Joan lives on.